Hey guys, how you doing? I think that horse is just sleeping, don't you? I was wondering what I was going to call this ridiculous video, but got a chance to watch most of the discussion back and forth. Not all of it, because a lot of it happened when I was sleeping. And I slept uncharacteristically late this morning. Apparently I was pretty wiped out. So, anyhow, um, I debated, do I jump back into this conversation one more time or not? Because I don't want to have a conversation, necessarily about Dungeons and Dragons or about, that sort of stuff. But, this is the current projects group, and this is one of the projects we're currently projecting and talking about. But it has a broader scope. So let me preface or qualify or whatever that word is that I'm looking for. These days, I like to go into a game rules as written and figure out what the hell it is that it's doing because I don't know anything about that game. Uncharted Worlds was kind of a departure from that because I saw just how, I don't want to say basic, that particular version of Powered by the Apocalypse was. And as I'm looking at a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, I'm wondering to myself, what if I just pull on this one little thread right here, and what would happen? How much would that change the game experience? Because I think I come at it with dual motivations. I'm very interested to see what game design does to the experience. Like if you change this one part here, what happens? Which I think, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I think in the history of game design, that's a lot of what's going on. And some people have thought, well, geez, what if we just change this little part here? What would the effect be? If this is either this isn't quite doing it, or I suspect that if we change just one little element here, then something different will happen. So that's one of the reasons I try to approach that game that way. But talking about this lineage back here, so you can't see, there's all the Ubiquity stuff over there and some of the other good junk. But as far as the, we'll call them the old Dungeons and Dragons, the old school OSR crap, I feel very confident house ruling if I want to, but there's always a reason why would I do that. I smile as I watch Sam's video because there's that point where I quipped, and don't take it the wrong way, Sam, thinking you realize you're inventing Microlight D20 or something like that, an extremely light version of that OGL system. Because, and then it even said right after I typed that comment, because the video stops when you do that via voice, and then he starts talking about the fact that he wanted this really slimmed down version of 3rd edition D&D. I'm like, well, I'm smiling because I'm like, well, that's what you're doing. Congratulations. Which don't feel bad because you're going down the same path that these other people did to get where you wanted. When I play the retro clones, when I look at them, really interesting what Ron Edwards said to me, because we did have this really brief exchange back and forth. He talked about the fact that he really has a I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he has an appreciation for the OSR because in many cases some people have taken this skeleton of an idea, the basic game, because it's really tough to nail down what the hell old D&D was because there were so many different versions. They've nailed this down, and they said, hey, I'm going to change this rule and this rule and this rule here. Maybe as he said, maybe they only changed like 4% of the DNA of the game with the purpose. They're designing on purpose. I want it to have this kind of effect, this kind of feel. This giant tome back here next to the box set, which is equally as giant, of Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, that is arguably 1st edition D&D tweaked by Jeff Talanian to create a very specific experience, right down to the fact of like the setting where it is, all of the monsters and all of the theme things that are missing from it, and what he's actually put in its stead, or what's remained. And he's going for this very Howard and Lovecraft flavor, and for using that system, he did a really, really good job. And he's a really cool guy, and I really dug what he did to a game that I thought I would never play again, so I backed the hell out of it and bought it. But he designed or modified that game on purpose to produce a certain experience, right down to just like some of the mechanics that he left in or changed or tweaked. So that's one of those things I look at when I look at some of those OSR retro clones, and there's a ton of them out there. I don't want to collect them all, but and I'm talking about ones that are built on the platform of that D&D, old D&D framework, whatever the hell it is, the 5 saving throws, the D20 to hit, the separate, the separate weird skill system, etc. All that sort of stuff. The non-unified mechanics, all that kind of junk. I'm talking about like modifying or those, and so a lot of those games have been designed on purpose. However, and I hate to go down this road, but this is the kind of road we're on right now as we're talking back and forth about it. The difference between playing something like All for One Regime Diabolique, rules as written, to me, versus the decision to play basic fantasy role-playing game, rules as written, is, and I love you, Jason, is like night and day. This is totally different. All for One, there's the Ubiquity-based games. These are designed on purpose, from the ground up, to do a specific thing, to create a specific feel. Basic fantasy role-playing game, which I love the hell out of, is a game that took a game that was cobbled together, more or less, and it's an homage to it. Uses most of those same mechanics and what have you. Tweaks a couple things, like he'll flip attack bonus from descending or armor class, descending armor class to ascending armor class. Changing it to what most people are used to, because it was his estimation. It's arguably a little bit simpler. I agree, but that's a different story. Doesn't really make a difference. He made a couple tweaks. Why did he make those tweaks to it? Whatever. However, that game still, when it comes to me, I've had so much experience with that game that it is, to me, still a basic framework or basic skeleton. If, and you can't break it, you're just going to change how it feels. If you're Sam and you decide, I'm not going to buy a Microlight D20, I'm going to take this basic fantasy role-playing game and I'm going to make all the adjustments to it to make it be the experience that I want it to be, you're not really playing basic fantasy role-playing game anymore. But you've modified the hell out of it to get to where you want it to be, where you probably would have been better off, getting something like, that Microlight D20 or whatever. It's like, oh, this does just about everything I want it to. Anyway, the other point that I quipped to Sam is that, what I always have to be very, very careful of, because this happens to me all the time, every time I read a new game, is, I come there with all the experience I have in the past. And especially if the game is somewhat similar, has the same name, or uses most of the mechanics or most of the ideas of a game that I'm used to, I look at like the 3 saving throws that they put into D20 and all that stuff, and I scratch my head and like that makes, not that it makes no sense. I don't like the effect that produces, because the saving throws at that point are about the ability scores. I'm just trying to read the comments. Just say no. And this is not a defense of 5 saving throws versus 3 saving throws. Don't misunderstand this. The 5 saving throw system is based upon the nature of the threat. So when you change saving throws from one version to the other, which you can, you're going to change the way the game feels. Just be aware of that. It's going to be a different experience. Where was I going with this? There was some kind of really important OSR thing, though. And I hate to keep on harping on this. When I take a game like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, right? That game, I know why it was designed. It was specifically, I'll give you an analogy. I don't know if you know anything about amplifiers, but just hold on. There's an amplifier company called SWR out of California, and back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, they became the next big thing for bass guitar amplification. Just blew everybody away. The guy that designed the speakers for that company was a guy named David Eden. David made speakers, and he sold them to SWR for a while, all that sort of stuff. Great guy. I owned both of their products for quite some time and talked to both companies. But he started to make a run of amplifiers himself. They kind of parted ways. And the reason he started to make amplifiers, an actual part that powers a speaker as well as a speaker, is because people told him in the industry, nobody's going to take you seriously if you just make speakers without making an amplifier as well. You have to kind of have this thing available as a unit. So that's what he did. This turns out to be less true now. Now there's companies that do one or the other. When James Raggi was starting Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or at least the game version of that name, because he's owned that name for like I think a metal magazine as well, which is awesome. He started out, to him the game lives in the modules. That's where his view or view of the game or vision for the game is. That whole weird fantasy role playing vibe and the stuff, all the stuff that most people object to. That to him is the cool part, and kudos to him, like metal, dude. But here's the thing: at some point he got told or realized, dude, nobody's going to take you seriously unless you have a rule set to go with these modules. So he was playing basic fantasy role playing game, Mold-A D&D, essentially reimagined, and he took that game, took that rule set, and tweaked a few things that he felt could be done better. And that's the reason that I like that game. It's fun to play it in the weird fantasy, vibe, and we've been having a fun doing it. And we're just kind of skipping across the surface in Lamentations of Prussia, just kind of kissing that vibe, because I'm not willing to go down that frickin' rabbit hole where, anyhow. But we kiss it, it's there. However, the rule set itself stands alone. And he did such a good job with tweaking some of the things that were problematic. Like Sam talked about, the idea of the percentile-based thief skills. It doesn't, I love percentile skills, but he just made that very, very simple, very, very easy to understand, very, very usable. You look at it and you're like, oh my God, why did nobody think of this? The way he kind of incorporated that with everything else. He took something like encumbrance, which is just a freaking most annoying son of a... when you're playing D&D, the old D&D, and you're counting, the coin weight of every single item you have, and well, wait a minute, the sword is worth... Yeah, we got to do session 7. The sword, wait, I put my sword down, so now I have 8 less coins, and did I go from the 9 to 12 move rate yet? And it's just this, holy crap. Like, it's agonizing. You know what happened? Nobody freaking used it, or you hand-waved it. And he made it, oh, you got this many items, boom, you're in the next slot. Armor's worth this many items, boom, and you have this little picture at the end. You realize that what you're actually carrying is your encumbrance list, and it actually has little lines, and I'm on a different move rate now. You're like, why didn't I think of that? Stuff like that. So I pick up the rule set, and honestly, you're like, holy crap, dude, seriously. And the only thing that I look at that game and say, what would I change? But why do I feel free to look at that game and say, what would I change at this particular moment? It's because I understand the effect that it would have. This sounds like full of hubris. And maybe it is, but I've had enough experience with that skeleton, with that framework, that encumbrance took a long time. Oh my God! You remember reading AD&D the first time? First few sessions, and you're making your character, and you're equipping your character. Buying stuff off the list and whatnot, and then you've got that list, and you've got the number of GP each particular item is worth. And you're scratching, and you have to go back to the table to see what your strength is and like how much stuff you can carry before. Jeez, I'm having these flashbacks of being 13 and doing that, and just like with the eraser and the pencil and this character sheet that's supposed to fit. You're used to basic and it's supposed to fit on a freaking note card. You've got these like 2 pages of crap. I understand the effect of making a change in one of these games, and what's going to happen. Yeah, well, I tell you, that was 13-year-old experience. Yeah, here I have so much experience, but I understand the effect of what's going to happen. If I look at like Lamentations of the Flame Princess and say, hey, you know what? The one thing I think he should have done is change the way the saving throws were. Not that he should have done, but I see that's what somebody else did with the saving throws. I say, like, I look at, where is it? This frickin' thing is just tough to do with its mirror image. Anyhow, the damn game over there, for God's sakes. The saving throws, the way they handle them in something like Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea with it's a little different. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I think I would do that a little bit differently because I don't like some of the effects that the old basic saving throws have in terms of what it does to certain classes and what have you. That's just personal preference. Will it change dramatically the way the game feels? No, not unless you're saving against something every 10 minutes. But it's one of those things that, like, if I were to make that change, that's what I'd do. The changes I made, the house rules. Let's talk about the house rules that I put into my particular Lamentations in Prussia game. There was reasons I put them in there. The reason I put in something like one of my favorite house rules of all time, the whole, magic users can cast little minor magics based on the spells they've memorized for that day. I picked that up from somebody a long, long time ago. I played with somebody else that was using that rule. I was like, this is great. Because it gives part of what that feel that Sam was kind of looking for a little extra, cantrip-y type stuff. What else can the wizard do when he's not casting his one spell or all this other kind of BS? And it's simple, it's elegant. It produces the desired effect without being this big, complex thing that's going to completely change the nature of how you interface with the game. And it's one of those things I follow. I say, you know what, that's a really, really cool rule if you want that particular effect. What's your intention? Here's a way to get it. What is the effect on the game going to be? And we tried it. Literally, I tried it in that other game, and I was like, you know what, this is pretty cool. It really doesn't have very nasty effects. I played it with some people that, if you've had, you have to be careful. You have to have that session 0 discussion, and sometimes that, as Anthony was talking about with a bunch of questions I still need to answer, that discussion in game. Hey, wait a minute, you're kind of overstepping the bound here a little bit. Anyhow, but that is one of those. I still have to be careful. When I look at, maybe I would house rule this particular OSR, I have to step back and say, wait a minute, why did this guy make these changes to the original product? Why did he present his OSR in this particular manner? What was his intention for the way this game was supposed to feel like it? Before I start yanking off the carburetor and putting on a fuel injector and a blower and everything, what was this game really supposed to feel like? What was the intention of this game supposed to be? From a hey, I recognize what this is, reading the book, actually playing it, and then, just as important, listening to the interviews with James Raggi talking about it, even like the stuff that Edwards talked about when he talked to Raggi, why did you do this, etc. I understand very clearly in the intention of why that rule set is what it is, why the changes were put there, and then I feel free to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to change this one little thing. As far as the which is part of I think, how we started getting down this rabbit hole a little bit. When I say something like, hey, if you're going to play Lamentations, or you're afraid to play Lamentations of the Flame Princess, I want to play an OSR. I want to play a really cool, simple-to-use OSR. I want to try this experience. Everybody says this one is really cool, but I don't like the weird horror vibe. There's the simple, don't look at the artwork, that sort of thing, right? But then there's okay, there may be one or two things in the rules that give you a weird horror vibe. And really, honestly, the only place they exist is in the description of a couple spells. There's a couple spells you may say, I don't really like this particular spell. That's where, it's easy to misinterpret, I think, what I said, or what I was trying to say. Maybe I just said it wrong. Yeah, just don't use that particular spell. Just don't, that sort of thing. If you take away some of the flowery language, like he explains that the Cloud Kill spell is opening the portals of hell and blah 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 flavor text. It's very cool, but it could be just your regular old, okay, yeah, it's a stink bomb, dude, and everybody dies. You change that little one thing, and then you move on. It's not wholesale changing of the game in that particular sense. It's so the veneer of weird fantasy horror on the actual rule set is very minor, and if there's this two little burrs, you just scrape off and don't use that sort of thing. That's a lot different than picking up Lamentations of the Flame Princess and saying, I don't like this 5 saving throws rules, I'm going to put 3 in here instead, or I don't like this particular part of it, so I'm gonna make a change there, and where you're changing the actual core rules of the game. You can do that. Go ahead. Knock yourself out. But at some point, you're no longer playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess. At some point, you're no longer playing an OSR retro clone. Anyhow, but other than that, with all that hubris aside, why do I feel comfortable messing with those, and what are the caveats, or the things I look at, in terms of intention before I start diving in and doing that. And I don't feel the need to do very, very much of that anymore. Most other games I play rules as written because I want to experience what happens. And well, this has gone really too long, but I'll tell you, I'll give you one really great example of somebody making a house ruling on purpose because they wanted an effect. They fixed what they saw was a problem in the system. Go watch Null Inquisitor's series on 7th Sea First Edition. Really great series. Like, it's not a game that I would want to play all the time, but I bought it when I found one in a used bookstore. I want to get the GM's guide. I want to have Seb run me through a few sessions of that. I really would like to do that. It's a amped up, on steroids, swashbuckling. It is a little too much for me, but I'd love to play it a few times. One of those days I feel particularly superhero-ish. Okay. 7th Sea First Edition. But watch his series. He explains the game really, really well, how the system works, and then he has one video where he talks about, here's one thing I would fix. This stuck in my, because he loves this game. This stuck in my craw. I didn't like this one thing. And I think he uses whatever their score is for intellect or cunning or what have you to affect the way that you dodge. Or it's some kind of defensive thing, if I recall correctly. And he explains what he did, why he did it, play testing it with his group, seeing how it felt different, and deciding, yes, you know what, this is a good house rule. I'm glad I did this. From now on, when I play this game, this is the one thing I'm going to change. And that was very surgical. That, to me, is the epitome of how you house rule something, or like how you fix something. That was like a hats off. That's a great rationale, explanation, because he took his time with it and figured out, yeah, I just think this is not quite working here. It's not really translating like what this person is really supposed to be like. And that's this particular case. And he made it, tested it, and worked out great. I believe the little tweaks that Lamentations of the Flame Princess made to, arguably Moldvay, basic fantasy role-playing game, that sort of thing. Those little surgical tweaks, because they're eye poppers. The encumbrance thing. Hey, you know what, dude? None of us could do this for the last 30 freaking years, or almost 40 years. Here's this, boom, and you're like, holy crap, dude! Why didn't I think of that? Ditto for the little D6 thief skills and how that all kind of works out. It's another like surgical, like, are you kidding me? Like, I didn't think of this like when I was 13. So, and I don't know what James Raji's thought process was with those. It's really irrelevant. But there's these really elegant. There's that one. That's that freaking zit right there. We've all been like kind of like just like, geez, would you look at that thing? And he figured out a way to get rid of it. So, big difference. So yes, I am a rules as written guy, but and sometimes I have to make sure I'm not being myopic when I'm looking at my OSRs, because I always look at like, gee, I would do it a little bit differently here. I feel a little bit more at liberty because I understand I know what I'm doing here, kids. But even then, I have to be careful. Am I going there with my old the experience of the past screwing up and making me unable to see what's really going on in this game, what the person's really doing, are my old preferences, are my old biases, my old experiences coloring what I'm looking at here? Should I, is this something that I need to play a bunch of times and experience, or is this something I'm like, hey, you know what, this just simply isn't working for me? So, that's a long description of probably what should be a really simple topic. And it's just me. I do have that division of like, there's all these games here, and then there's just the old D&D thing over here. It's kind of a different animal, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, and I got to go do some real stuff. The end.